Today we welcome Scott Aaron of Socius Development. Scott, welcome to the Build Up.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here.
We're very excited to talk to you today. Not only, like Candice said, you are now a developer, but you were a pro golfer, right? So talk to us about how you became inspired to be a golfer.
Inspired. Well, I was born into it, actually. My grandfather was a golf pro and built golf courses.
Wow.
My father was a PGA professional, and so was my uncle. And I grew up in the Catskills in upstate New York. So they were pros at the various resorts up there. And that's where I learned how to play golf. So just by default, over my lifetime, I've always been playing golf.
That's amazing.
So it was kind of natural.
That's amazing. We were wondering if there was like a family influence or if you found it on your own. It's usually, we see a lot of the family influence, but that's awesome that it's a legacy for your family. We know that becoming a professional athlete is so difficult because there's so much competition out there. There's so much talent. So what was your experience like as you were breaking down those barriers to becoming a professional athlete?
I never really intended on turning pro in golf. I played high school golf and I played during the summers on the junior circuits when I was growing up. And then I ended up playing Division I college golf. And even then I kind of knew I wasn't good enough to play with the Tiger Woods of the world. But after college, I turned pro and I was just going to look for a time period where I could make some money, teach golf, and then end up going to law school. But then my game started getting better and better, and I started playing in some tournaments that showed a little promise, and I got sponsored. And from the early 90s, I guess 92 through 96, I was able to, kind of stay out there on the mini tours and played in South America on the pro tour in Canada and things like that. So it wasn't really my intention, but my game was good enough to kind of do what I did. It never got good enough to stay and progress to the big tours, but it was fun while it lasted.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And so golf and real estate, very different, right? So how did you know that you wanted to get into real estate and how did you transition out of golf?
Well, in the summer of 96, I kind of had enough with golf and I was playing in the US Open qualifier and I just kind of thought to myself, if I don't qualify to play in the Open, I'm done. And the odds of me making it into the Open at that point were pretty low anyway. But I didn't qualify and I kind of threw my golf clubs in the trunk and went home. And 6 months later, I was working in the city in real estate for the Continuum Company. And I went to NYU to the Real Estate Institute at night. And that's how I started. I was making $200 a week and working until 11 o'clock every night and just learning as much as I could possibly learn.
Was there a specific inspiration that made you think about real estate versus, pursuing any other type of career after golf?
Well, I grew up in the hotels in the Catskills, so I was always romanticizing being a hotelier, and I loved that hospitality industry. It was natural to me, just like golf was, because since I was probably 7 years old, we've been hustling for quarters or dollars at the various hotels, my friends and I, all through high school. And you kind of learn, the hotel industry if you're working in it from such a young age and being around it all the time. So that was really my goal, was to get into the hotel industry. I always liked it. And I thought that the real estate conduit was, made sense.
Amazing. Golf is one of the most skill-intensive sport that exists. It requires a lot of mental skill, a lot of mastery of the physical side of it as well. So now that you've built this really successful real estate career, especially in development, have you seen some transferable skills of what you're pulling from as a previous golfer into now what makes a successful real estate developer and owner?
Sure. It's an interesting parallel because I've actually thought about this in the past and there are a whole bunch of different pieces of kind of pursuing a professional athletic career, whether it's golf or anything else, that would transfer into business, right? So I think, for example, discipline for sure. When you're working through your career as a professional athlete, the discipline to get up every morning, to practice, to plan, and to have a goal at the end is an important piece of that progress. And I think in real estate, especially in development, having the discipline to kind of plan your building, do the design process, understand what your vision is, work with great professionals around you to deliver that, and so that when the shovel hits the ground, you've done all of the planning beforehand, right? And that generally gets you to have a successful project.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably something that's transferable between the two. The other thing I would say is that, especially in golf, if you look at any of the tour pros that are out there practicing before a tournament, for example, they're working on the basic fundamentals all the time: grip, stance, posture, setup, tempo. And whether you're a tour pro or whether you're starting out as an amateur, that basic fundamental is the most important part. And I think when you're building a building, the basic fundamentals that we all know about: great layouts, light and air, good quality materials.
Location,
exactly. Those fundamentals are really important when you're planning a building. And if you have those fundamentals, whether it's in golf or whether it's in real estate development, and you've mastered those, you can then get creative. So, if Phil Mickelson's hitting a shot from behind a tree and it's going 6 different directions, high and low, and it stops on the green and 6 feet from the hole, he can only be that creative once he's mastered all of the very basic fundamentals. Someone like Ian Schrager, who is, one of my design heroes, right? Most creative guy out there, right? But I'm sure Ian, when he's putting together a building, and I do this as well, you have to master the fundamentals of putting that building together. And then you can sit with your interior design team and your architects and you go, okay, let's get creative and let's really kind of make this different than everything else. Knowing that you have the basics set up in front of you, your risers are stacked, your building's efficient, your bathrooms are where they need to be, the size of your bedrooms are what they need to be, so that, we've all been in an apartment where the bed is 2.5 inches from the end of the room, right? We don't like that. So, those type of basic ideas are really important. And once you get that down, then you can get creative. And that's the fun part, right? That's what differentiates you from the guy across the street.
Right. And you talked about preparation a lot, and that being, the fundamentals being the key to hopefully success as a real estate developer and obviously as a golfer. But you did mention, it's not necessarily a guarantee, and there's so many things outside of your control when you're building, and the biggest one being the market, right? You can't control, you could build the best building in the best location, but you can't control the market. And, after building 2 million square feet, I'm sure you've weathered your fair share of market cycles. And so, how have you faced those challenges, as you're still trying to create this great product, but the market, you're kind of swimming against the current and the market's working against you? How have you been able to still, outperform your competition and be successful?
Well, I think certainly being a New York developer has its advantages, because I just read this morning in Bloomberg. We are 385,000 units behind supply in the city, right?
Big number.
Big number, and getting bigger.
Yeah.
So there's a difference between, say, here in Miami or here in Atlanta. The barrier to entry here is great. So if you go back to, say, the mid-'90s when I started, we've seen the dot-com bubble. We've seen Lehman crash. We've seen COVID. We've seen periods of time in the early 2000s where financing was non-existent. I bought my first apartment in the city. My interest rate was 7.2%, and everybody's jumping up and down today because they can't get 3% money, right? But that's really kind of normal where we are now. And I think that as you move through these cycles, you have to recognize that New York City probably has the least boom and bust out of any city that we know of. Certainly in the rental market, right? I mean, you might get a little bit of a few bucks here and there difference, but if you're building rentals in the city, you're pretty much going to fill up. So I view it as you've got a few different risks in development that you have to mitigate. You have construction risk, which if you work with your top construction companies in the city, which I do, it mitigates that risk. Now, of course, things happen, but you try to mitigate that. You have market risk, which we talked about, much more in condos than in rentals, of course. But even condos, if you're not unrealistic about your pricing, if your inventory control is good, and if you build a good quality building with good layouts, and New Yorkers know layouts better than I think anybody, and they're not going to suffer fools when it comes to the layouts in the building. If you do all those things right and you're priced reasonably well, you should be able to sell your building out, barring COVID or something like that, right? And in rentals, it's plus or minus $1, right? So the key is to get it built, and to get it built on budget and on time. And that's what we focus on. So, there's market risk, there's construction risk, there's always interest rate risk, and we're seeing that. We've seen that over the past couple of years where people were leveraged and they've had issues. But I think that we try to mitigate those in the planning process and just keep kind of going, knowing that, New York will blip here and there, but it's never going to get like many of the other cities.
So you touched on, working with the design team, and we know from seeing some of your successful projects that collaboration is a really important part of your process. So talk to us about, working with world-class architect, designers, and just the creative part of building a building. Talk to us about that process.
Sure. Well, I've been lucky enough to work with some great architects and engineers and designers throughout my career, and construction companies as well. Because at the end of the day, a developer could sit up there and say, oh, I built this and I built that. We didn't build anything. It's the guy lacing the wires through the studs in the drywall that's building the building. It's the guy or the woman in the trenches pouring concrete that's building the building. So what we're trying to do as developers is really kind of direct the movie, right? And in order to direct a good movie, you really have to have a good cast of players, right? So I'm currently working with Buyer, Blender, and Bell as an architect on our building. They're the cream of the crop. I've worked with Costas in the past, back when Costas, Peter Clayman at Slice, and Luigi. Like there's groups of architects out there, Marvel architects. The top of the top, right?
Yes.
My engineers, D. Simone and MG and Frank Setta and RA Engineering. These are the guys that over and over and over again are consistently at the top of the New York food chain when it comes to designing buildings, And if you put your trust in them and you listen to what they have to say, and then you can make educated decisions, that's the collaboration. They know what my vision is because I'll be pretty clear about it. But at the end of the day, I want as much feedback from them as I can possibly get, because you don't pretend to know as much as, your structural engineer, if they're D. Simone. I want to hear from them on what's going on. And then, of course, you have to have great construction companies to work with. Triton Construction I'm working with now, and Caldwell Wingate in the past, like really top-notch construction companies. But when it comes to interior design, that's where you can get creative. And I can tell you a quick story. I've worked with Andres Escobar on our last building, a couple of buildings actually, but on Fulton Street on Exhibit. And Andre is one of the most creative guys I've ever met, and a top-notch interior designer. And we couldn't figure out, not that we couldn't figure out, but we were going through the process internally of trying to figure out what this building wanted to be from a personality. Garrett Goulet was the architect, and Garrett and I kind of had the exterior down to what we wanted. But the interior was up in the air. And so one day I was down in Soho, and I kind of wandered over to Balthazar, and I'm having lunch and a glass of wine or whatever. And then decided from there I'm just going to kind of go through the galleries and just walk around the art galleries for a little while. And I wandered into to Morrison Hotel Gallery. I saw all of these great old photographs of downtown New York with CBGBs and Cafe Wah and all these really cool music and art kind of photographs. And I called Andres and I said, I've got this idea that I want this building. Maybe this building is like the factory, like Andy Warhol's factory. And I want it to have this kind of downtown New York 70s, 80s kind of feel to it, but it needs to be luxury. I was like, it's all yours. It's like, I got you. Give me a week. And so a week and a half later, he came back with a whole slew of mood boards, and we can do this and we can do that. And it blew me away because, and I said to him, I was like, you have no handcuffs. I was like, do whatever you want to do.
That.
Yeah.
Yeah. I said, I'm not telling you what to do. This is all on you. Like, I trust him implicitly. And I think that out of those first round of mood boards, we probably used 95% of the stuff in the design, right down to the furniture and the gallery. We ended up working with a curator to curate the whole building. And it was a long process, but giving Andres the idea and the license to kind of do what he wants to do and work with me on tweaking this or tweaking that, that's the kind of back and forth I think you need during the design process to come up with something that's pretty special, and we did.
That does, yeah, it's very special in the way that you're also empowering those who are experts in their own craft to really shine. Whereas sometimes as a developer, you overpower, the other experts kind of in your circle, and it's not as collaborative. They kind of take the position of, they're all knowing and all of that. And so it's great to see that you empowered your team to really help create this very successful project. But as you're sharing, and mentioning some of these names, all I'm thinking about is like dollar signs and dollar signs. I know that these architects and designers don't come without a very, high price tag to work with. So have you felt that they've really added tangible value in terms of the financial return of your projects? Like how can you justify, having a world-class architect and designer on, a rental project, let's say?
Well, I think 90% of the battle in building a building is the 12 months or so, 10 to 12 months of design process to get a really good set of drawings. Because the contractors will build what you hand them. And if you hand them a set of drawings that is missing, $3 million worth of stuff, whether it's a soffit or this is misaligned or that's misaligned, if those drawings aren't good, your budget's not going to end up where you want it. So they're not that much more expensive than, say, what I would call your middle tier design teams. And the value that you gain is tremendous. And I think the best money spent is in the design process, because you never want to get to put a shovel in the ground and your SOE is off, or your structure, you're missing something in the structure, your column lines aren't quite right. Like that's where you end up with serious problems. Mm-hmm. And so this team that I've worked with over and over and over again, for the most part, I trust them, and they know what I want, and I know what they're capable of doing, and they're always coming up with ideas to create a building that works for what we're looking for, and they're in it to help me value engineer as well. They're not going to over design a building just for the sake of over designing a building. And then we have our construction company working with us through the entire design process. So if we say, we want to maybe do this brick or this glass, we'll price that out. And if that's in our budget, we can work with it. If not, we can find an alternative as we go along. So you're not
married to any one design idea, because you get feedback from your contractors as you go. Sure.
Yeah. We know. I mean, look, I've been doing it long enough to I kind of know what things cost, right down to the faucet. But there's always room to try different things as you go along, as long as you know that your basic fundamentals of the building are going to be designed right. I mean, you could have two buildings next to each other that look exactly the same, and one costs $80 million, the other costs $72 million, and the reason is because on the inside behind the walls, the one building has a bunch of offsets, and you have exterior bathrooms, and there's all sorts of different, things where ductwork has to go, 50 feet this way. And so there are a lot of extra costs, whereas this building looks exactly the same, but the bathrooms are back to back, the kitchens are set up correctly, things. So when you're designing an efficient building, that design team is worth its weight in gold.
Yeah, I also think too, as brokers, we are always out taking buyers and renters out. And I do think that when you see a building that's very different, that you see that, they had a full design team, you walk away remembering that building, because, you're walking all day with these buyers and renters, and they're seeing like 5 to 6 buildings, and they walk away and all of them look the same finishes, the same design. But when you see one that stands out, definitely it's worth it.
Right. No, I agree 100%. And that, when we built 100 West 18th Street, that was the time period in the mid 2000s where everybody was doing glass boxes, right? The condo glass box. And Garrett and I were talking about, what can we do? Because we visited, 15 projects, and 12 of them looked exactly alike. So if I'm a broker and I'm taking my buyer to all these different projects, we used to have those, I don't know.
We still have the brochures.
All the brochures, and, stacks and stacks of brochures. And they would be like, which one was that, right? We never wanted to be that group. So we were the first ones to do that, like a black manganese brick building, right? On 18th and 6th. And it turned out beautiful. That was, Garrett came up, he said, I want to show you something. Don't freak out. And he gave me this black brick that had this like iron ore in it, and it was like reflective. And I was like, let's do it. This is great, you know?
That's cool.
And it turned out to be a really cool building, and it sold out, and we did a really good job there. But it wasn't like any other building around. But everybody who walked through that building remembered it.
The black brick building.
Black brick building.
You mentioned how, being a New York developer has its opportunities. It's not as much of a boom and bust market as others, but you also said it has a very high barrier to entry, which it does. And so, you've been doing this a long time. Are you still very bullish on developing in New York? Or are you starting to expand elsewhere as New York has unfortunately become a little bit less developer friendly?
It has, and I'm hoping that things change a little bit more. I'm a New York guy. I like it here. I'm comfortable here. I know my way around here. I've been in Miami. I mean, I was part of a team that built a building in Miami, and it did really well. What I like about New York is the certainty when it comes to zoning. You know what you're going to build. It's more expensive to get in here. But I think that once you have a piece of land that you can deal with, you kind of know what you can build, and I think that certainty is, that's why you pay for it, right? I haven't really. I've looked at other markets just casually. I haven't seen anything that really excites me like New York. I love it here, and I just plan on keep building here.
Yeah. Well, we love that. We're here too.
Definitely.
What about upstate where you're from in the Catskills? Do you ever see opportunities there, or you're just very into the city market here?
I have, in my past life, attempted, when I was with another company, to do an assisted living platform and to go through the zoning process and the entitlement process outside of New York City and in Westchester County and not so much upstate. I haven't really looked at anything upstate. It's just years and years and years to get something approved, and it can be torpedoed at the last minute by a planning board or something like that. So I tend to like certainty. I'm lucky enough to where I work with, I've partnered with parking garage operators in the city who own the land already. I kind of have a little bit of a niche where the buildings I've built, a lot of them have been on former parking garage sites. So we have a pipeline that we're working with now.
That's great.
I was just at a construction site today. We're doing test borings on two different parking garages that are going to become rental buildings.
Very cool.
Yeah, we need that inventory.
Yeah.
We also need parking though, so you got to keep some parking.
Yeah. Well, I think we're getting low on parking in this city. But so I think that if the guys the families who have these parking lots and parking garages, those are always potential sites. It's tough to find a site in New York City. There's no question about it. Hopefully the new zoning, the new 485X that came out will help us to convert some office buildings. It's tough to find an office building to convert too because of the floor plates, right? So we'll see what happens over the next 36 months, how that works out.
Yeah. You clearly have a successful career, but what are some key lessons you've learned throughout your career that really shaped your approach to real estate?
You mean as it relates from golf to real estate?
No, just in your real estate career.
Oh, in my real estate?
Yeah.
I think the most important thing is to have integrity and to be honest. There are no secrets here. As you're going through the development process and you're dealing with lenders and you're dealing with purchasers and you're dealing with construction companies and design teams, if you say something, you mean it, and you don't lie, cheat, or steal. It's a small town. Your reputation is everything. I grew up in a very small town. My graduating class had 68 people in it. So if you weren't honest, you were called out immediately. There was no hiding anything. Everybody knew everything about you. And I kind of keep that philosophy now. I think you just have to be a straight up honest person. I think that's the reputation that I have.
And I think too in golf, right? Isn't that, I don't personally play golf, but I've heard, just playing golf, you kind of have to trust the people that you're playing with, right? You do have to have that approach.
You might kick your ball a little bit.
Right.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
No, golf is all about integrity. Right? You police yourself. I've played in thousands of tournaments. You typically don't have a rules official walking with you. That's only on the PGA Tour. I've called, plenty of penalties on myself, as has, most players I've ever played with. And that's the way the game is. And I think that's kind of how you should be in life. You do it the right way, and you keep moving.
Yeah, definitely. For sure. That's definitely a great lesson and piece of advice, because a lot of our listeners, are people who are thinking about getting into real estate. Not all of them come from a real estate family background. So what advice would you give someone who is looking to get started, maybe not right away as a developer, but definitely just to get started as an investor in the real estate industry?
Well, I guess those are two different things, right? As an investor, it's fundamentals. I think that, I had a friend who built quite a big portfolio of existing multifamily buildings. I think she had over 8,000 units. And I know for a fact that when she went out to buy a building, she spent a lot of time walking through the building, understanding what the CapEx might look like, understanding what the rent rolls really looked like, because nothing is ever what it says it is on the spreadsheet, right? So, real estate is local. You've got to put boots on the ground. You've got to go see the building. You've got to go see the neighborhood. You've got to understand what's going on in the neighborhood if you're going to buy a building. As it relates to development, there's so much to development. There's the finance, the legal, the construction, the design, the marketing and sales. And you kind of have to be half dangerous at all of it to understand that. But I think the best way to start, the people that I know that ended up being pretty successful developers started usually on the construction side, understanding how a building is built. When I first started, I spent a lot of time at, these contractors' offices. I didn't know what a P-TAC was or how to put a piece of drywall up. But I watched and I learned. And I think that was the basis for sitting in these construction meetings and these design meetings over the years, and at least understanding what everybody's talking about and being able to take that information and make decisions. So I think it's not glamorous, but being out there on the construction sites is a great way to start. One of my closest friends, he went to Princeton, really smart guy. I think his first job out was like a labor foreman. Mm-hmm. And he learned construction, and now he's pretty successful real estate guy. So you have to learn the basics. It's what I said earlier. It's understanding the basics in order to become creative.
And great, yeah. Mm-hmm. No, that's wonderful advice. And, just like everything that you said, we're really glad you said it's not glamorous, because a lot of people get into real estate, whatever aspect, brokerage, development, because it seems glamorous. But to really succeed, you have to kind of, learn from the, ground up, mm-hmm. pun intended. And it's not always, as glamorous as it's made to seem. And so a lot of people become disillusioned very quickly, and then they get out, but that's okay, because more opportunities for us. And,
right.
But no, we're glad that you said that, because it's important to kind of manage people's expectations when they're, committing to getting into a new career or starting a new investment. So very, very glad that you said that. And we'll leave you with one more question, which is just about kind of like where you're thinking, what's the future hold for you, for associate development? You mentioned you still want to be very bullish on New York, but is there anything new that you have your eye on, or a new way that you're looking to develop here in New York?
We've got 2 buildings that'll start design this month.
Wow. 2
new rental buildings. We are working with a group on a rezoning in Brooklyn. That's a pretty big rezoning. We have another building that we're advising on. We started kind of a branch off of the development company to have an advisory firm because we've been approached, I can't imagine how many times, by either LPs or co-developers that have kind of put up the money for the project, and the GP and the developer have put up a lower percentage of the money. Mm-hmm. So we don't get involved in any of the design or anything like that, but we kind of advise the LPs on the building, on how it's going, kind of report back to them. So that side of the business we've just started, and we've got a few different groups that we're working with now. So the development side is getting pretty active again now that we've got some legislation. Mm-hmm. But we've also got this new branch off that we're working with, and it's kind of interesting.
No, we definitely need more advisory. I mean, we've also, work in that kind of capacity a little bit, with developers on like Unimix and pricing and things like that. Mm-hmm. And so, that's the best way to succeed, is really to surround yourself with a team who can really guide you. And so that's great that you're adding that on to your already very impressive resume. So we're so excited for all that is in store for you, all your new buildings. We'll be tracking them. And thank you so much again for coming in and sharing all those insights with us.
This has been great.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Thank you. So given that you and I focus on new development here in New York City, we are not only tracking residential developments, we're always staying aware and top of mind of commercial developments as well. And something that we like to talk about is hotels specifically, because we saw in the headlines that there's a lot of hotel development all throughout the country, but it's around very specific places.
Yeah, like you mentioned, we do track new developments very closely, and we haven't really touched on the hotel sector a lot on the show, but I think it was really interesting that we came across that study that CoStar did, and they tracked about 700 submarkets, and they said that San Diego, particularly the south and east part of it, as well as West Phoenix and LaGuardia and North Queens, they are actually on top of the most amount of hotel rooms.
The development that we're seeing is spread all over the country. In the Southwest specifically of the U.S., we're seeing a big development around Chula Vista. It's called the Gaylord Pacific Resort and Convention Center. So it's going to be this massive development. It's going to have 500,000 square feet for event space, multiple dining options, pools, full service spa, and of course, 1,600 hotel rooms. So that's one of the biggest new hotel developments that we're seeing in the country right now.
That's really amazing because I did see that the mayor as well, he spoke up and he said that this is going to be like such a really good development for the local economy. And it's just really amazing when you think about how one project can really have such a big impact on that economy.
There's also the VAI Resort in Glendale. That one's making big waves, and that's going to be another 1,100 room property coming to that general region.
And where is that? In Phoenix?
In the Phoenix West area, yeah. And this hotel is the second largest hotel under construction in the U.S., and it's next to the State Farm Stadium. So there's another, we always talk about how sports centers or entertainment venues can become a center for a lot of development around it, like a nucleus really. Mm-hmm. And so that's actually part of why this new area is really seeing a lot more hotel development.
That's great because we always talk about it, the trends, and a lot of our listeners are always looking to, learn where should they invest. And that's amazing that it's right next to the stadium. And we always talk about it, like you said, with the sports and whatever infrastructure is there, and you just build up on it.
Yeah.
But, moving over to the East Coast, we're talking about LaGuardia and North Queens.
Our backyard.
Yeah, exactly. And it's been amazing to really see how LaGuardia has really, evolved in these past few years. It's really great to actually go there and take a flight now.
So clean and new.
Exactly. But also, talking about new development and hotels, we've seen an increased percentage. I think it's something like 23% increase in hotel rooms, and 9 hotels are being built, and they actually range from lower economy all the way to upper class luxury. So that's really nice. You have a variety. So it really caters to a lot. And, also, again, LaGuardia is there, so a lot of people are coming in. So it just makes sense that you want to have hotels around.
Yeah. I mean, aside from the $8 billion remodeling of LaGuardia, New York City is seeing other areas with increased hotel development along the East River in Queens, too. So not just northern Queens near the airport, but even along the water is getting really nice traction, as well as the west part of Brooklyn as well. So New York City is seeing a lot of development as we look look nationwide in terms of which markets are having the most construction for hotels?
Well, that's really interesting because, post-COVID, a lot of people were getting a lot more tourists, right, coming in. And it's really nice to see the city back alive. We've gone through a lot. So it just makes sense overall, like we mentioned with the airport right there. And, JFK can be such a hassle to go all the way down there in Queens. So it just makes sense that it's just really convenient for people to come in and they want to stay around. And then, of course, we have the subway here, so it's easy to get around.
Yeah. And the final area to round out, so far we've talked about the Southwest, we've talked about Northeast being New York City, and now let's talk about Florida. What are we seeing in Florida?
Yeah, so we're seeing a lot in Florida. We're seeing neighborhoods like Naples, Palm Bay, and even downtown Miami, having an increased amount of hotels being built. So Naples, as you know, they're still recovering from Hurricane Ian, so naturally there are going to be, new developments, but it's really nice that they're building hotels, which means that, they're expecting tourists to visit. And again, we're seeing a lot of, brand name, right? And also independent hotels being built.
Yeah, we talked about, I think in our last episode about, how insurance is rising because of all these natural disasters that are increasing. And of course, Florida has been
one of those states being hit
by so many and facing the brunt of it. We talked about how much it costs and to rebuild. And so, talking about Naples and how they're rebuilding now from all the hurricanes they're experiencing, it's obviously still kind of tying back to that.
And personally, too, when I visited Florida last, I know about like pre-COVID, it was more of like a retirement community. But just personally from my experience, I know a lot of my friends who are younger, they have actually moved out there. So you're seeing an influx of younger people. So different energy being, is there. And so naturally, a lot of people are going to want to go there and really experience it because it is quite beautiful. And
of course.
Yeah. And, sometimes Miami is just overdone. And then you go down to like Palm Beach and then you just keep moving on because you want to have more of an experience.
Yeah. And the other reason why Florida is one of the markets that we're talking about in terms of increased construction for hotels is because of the cruise ship industry and cruises.
That's huge in Florida, right?
Yeah. They have one of the second busiest ports in all the world for cruise ships. And so that still remains a really attractive way for people to travel and experience the world. And so that brings down a lot of tourism, which of course then creates the demand for hotels.
Also, we talked about Miami, and Miami downtown has also seen like an increase, and it keeps increasing. They actually are anticipating about 1,800 hotel rooms. So we're seeing, the Treehouse, Brickell, which is, a nice brand. And also we're seeing Baccarat, which, we personally love here in New York, but it's really nice that they're expanding to Miami as well. But then you see hotels like the Dream, they're just expanding. So they're doing really well there. And that's just a really nice indication that the demand is there for you to want to expand.
Yeah, for sure. But as we always know, with new development and with construction, as exciting as the soul is, it comes with its own set of challenges. And right now is particularly a tough climate to be building because of high interest rates. As most people are familiar with what the interest rate is as an individual buyer, but it's so much higher when you're actually on like a construction loan or when you're doing it for investment.
Also too with that, with new development, it's such a long period. So you really have to be very, it's a big risk, right? Because you don't know what's going to happen, how it's going to increase, how that's going to affect your, construction loan and things like that.
And not to go back to it again, but the insurance premiums that are now increasing in places like Florida, are really putting a burden on these developers who are trying to make these investments work. So, really bottom line is that these developers have to be very selective on where they choose to invest.
For sure. There's a very fine line between opportunity and risk, right? But I think the demand is there, obviously, and we're seeing a lot of expansion like we talked about. So, we'll keep an eye on this. Definitely. It's really nice to touch on the hotel sector, like we mentioned, but we perhaps have to get a guest on here next so we can really dive into it. It's very 100%. Interesting.
We want to thank Scott again for joining us today. We really enjoyed learning more about his background, the parallels between his former pro golf career, as well as now how he's phased into real estate development and his disciplined mindset that's really set him up for success. So we really enjoyed that conversation.
We hope you found our discussion on hotel development insightful, and don't forget to join us next week. And of course, join us on our social at tower.com.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute tax, legal, or investment advice.
For specific recommendations, please consult with your financial, legal, or tax professional.